Hello there, and welcome to Gooner U Film Studies, where there are no degrees because the learning never stops. I'm Dove, an adjunct professor here in the Film Studies department, and my friend Keith is our stalwart distinguished professor of Arsenal and football studies. During our regular Gooner U episodes, we cover the past week's events in Arsenal, the Premier League, and other soccer topics. But during our Film Studies episodes, we discuss a film, and occasionally a book, from the annals of soccer film history and share our insights about film, history, and our knowledge of the beautiful game. In a break from our traditional film studies practice, we did read the 1992 book Fever Pitch by Nick Hornby, and then we watched the 1997 film adaptation of the same title featuring Colin Firth. Then I, and I alone, watched the 2005 remake of that movie, again of the same title, at least in the USA, starring Jimmy Fallon and Drew Barrymore, shifting it to baseball instead of soccer for a rounded out experience.
As you say, you alone watched it. It shall remain that way forevermore. Hi, Dove. How are you this evening?
I'm good. It's been a while, Keith. How you doing? What have you been up to?
Summer. I've been up to summer. It's been a busy off season, but that's not what the show's about. Don't worry about it.
Well, yeah, you kept me busy when you told me about this book I hadn't heard of before. You mentioned Fever Pitch, and I thought, oh, the Red Sox movie? And you said, no, actually, it was a book about Arsenal first, and you blew my mind. And so now I've read the whole thing. That kept me busy for a few weeks in my off time as we wrapped up the regular season with Arsenal. And I'm very glad I read it. I mean, it was a great experience. I learned a whole lot about the history of the team. Anybody who is watching this who is clearly at least passingly interested in Arsenal, I urge you, please do go and read it if you haven't. If you don't feel like making the commitment to reading a book, at least go see the movie, which again, I didn't realize that there was a prior film adaptation. I didn't know that the Fever Pitch I'd always known was a remake. And that's, now I know. And it's interesting. So talking about the book. So if we're kind of distilling some of the things that it's about, I mean, it's a memoir. It sprawls a little bit, but it follows a very tight chronology of Nick Hornby's life seen through the eyes of Arsenal matches. That's kind of the formula of it, right? And I feel like one of the biggest things that he's getting across and focusing on is the ways that the game has changed. So he started in the early to mid 60s and carried that through into the early 90s. The book was published in 1992. And so he started off when he was a kid, going with his father, and that lit the fire that it burned into an obsession as he got older. And it's interesting, like to hear him describe the game from so long ago. I mean, you wonder, like, it seems so foreign to me. It doesn't seem like the same thing that we've watched on TV together the last few years and that you'd been watching for a while before I started. It doesn't seem like the same game almost.
In a lot of ways, that's true. And some of that, I think a lot of it has to do with sort of the ancillary things that go on around the game. And since the game itself is still the same thing. It's two teams of 11 men kicking a ball around for 90 minutes. Mm-hmm. Now, and you probably got a sense of this even just watching the clips of the games that were interspersed in the movie. The way the game is played has changed a tremendous amount, hasn't it? Like, it looks like a very different sport in some ways, doesn't it? Even though the basics of it are, for the most part, still very much the same. Mm-hmm. I think part of what's going on there is about how the game, and he's talking about the game around it, and he's talking a lot about the fan experience, of course.
Right.
But I think the other thing that changes, this is there is a certain coming of age element to this story. It's a memoir, and so I see it as, in some ways, it's the game that's changing. To also some degree, it's a little bit of him. And now he's changing, even if he doesn't necessarily say that directly. But yeah, in a lot of ways, the game is different. And the way other people around think and talk about it is different. And, we're two Americans talking about something that is ultimately very British or very English. And so some of the class elements, I think, are a little more foreign to us, or not something that, or you can see them. They're not hard. They're hard to miss, but they don't resonate with us perhaps in the same way as other things might to an American audience with our cultural obsessions.
Well, yeah. I mean, so some of the specific changes, I guess, that I'm thinking of would be like hooliganism and riots and people literally getting killed by the dozens at a soccer match. Like, that's the kind of thing that I couldn't fathom happening the way the game is today, right? Which clearly it didn't happen that many. Like, you didn't have 74 people dying like all the time. That was a one-time thing. But people dying onesies or twosies did seem like it actually happened more than that. There's the one episode in the book where he's talking about like finding a guy like face down and like he was fascinated because he's a kid and it was like a dead body. But it was like, it seems like sometimes it happened. You need to be careful. Like, you need to keep to your section. They release the sections. Like, some of you do see the remnants of that today with having the supporters section, and they stick around till the home fans have all left and things like that.
Yeah, and some of that's deliberate choice. The movie makes a bigger deal about it than the book does. Of course, is the Hillsborough Stadium disaster,
right?
And then we can also talk a few years earlier the Heysel. We had this whole conversation about pronouncing it right. The Heysel Stadium disaster in Belgium, which involved both of which involved English teams in particular. In particular, it was Liverpool that was connected to both of them. But there were a lot of deliberate choices made in the aftermath, particularly of Hillsborough, to get those elements out of the game, to find ways to make this the circumstances around the game, the logistics of attending a match, to be a little bit more stable. So that's the shift away from grandstands and this all standing areas to what they call the all seaters. That is, there are chairs for everyone, and you only give tickets to people who you only get in if there's a ticket that's connected to a particular seat. There's been a lot of work done. It is law in England that you are not allowed to consume alcohol within sight of the pitch.
Oh wow, I didn't even know that. So
they are not. So I remember, you think about it here in the U.S. Like you go and you get a beer at the game, or as someone pointed out, there's literally a guy who walks around the stands selling beer. But
in my case, yesterday I saw the Yankees and the Cubs selling frozen margaritas because why not?
because why not? Exactly. But so I remember 20 years ago at this point, I went to Craven Cottage at Fulham for a game, and I had a. I forget what I ate, but I ordered a beer, and I started to, I'm an American. I'm just going to take this back to my seat. And, stadium security was like, no, you're not coming in with that.
Right.
They would. And so I had to drink it under the stands before I went back in. Because
that's clearly more advisable is chug it all at once before you go to the pitch. It's clearly better than sipping on it as the game transpires.
Well, right. It does raise some interesting questions there. But the idea was that you don't do
right.
that.
Right.
Because that's because of a lot of these things, that some of these were driven by people who were consuming a fair amount of alcohol. The English drink a lot. I don't know if you know that. I don't know if you know this. I know this is a big surprise to a lot of people. But yeah, there's a lot of deliberate changes made after Hillsborough in particular. And then, the Heysel disaster, English teams are banned from Europe for about 5 years. Or I think it was 5 years.
It's crazy.
5 years. Because of the behavior of English fans abroad. And so there's this deliberate effort to sort of weed a lot of that out. And some of that's targeting particular people. You'll also have talk about the hooligan gangs, and I feel like we've talked about them on the regular show too. People who they weren't even really fans of the club. The club was just sort of almost like they're a gang identifier. They would schedule fights with each other.
Oh wow! Yeah.
They would basically just agree sort of unofficially to meet with whoever your team was playing. You would meet somewhere near the stadium, not outside it. That was too close. But somewhere near the stadium, and they would just beat the crap out of each other until the police showed up.
Yeah, that's nuts.
It's crazy.
No, and you definitely got the sense of that a little bit in the book, where you'd talk about like Rat or other characters who were like they were there to mix it up. Like I'm sure the ones who he's talking about did actually still watch the game and were there primarily for the game, but enjoyed the chaotic aspects of it.
Yeah. And a lot of those rules you were talking about there about the visiting team, visiting fans, not just the particular section, but also just being forced in and being escorted in and out. That again, some of that is a result of this kind of thing. Prevent the opportunities for the two fan groups to interact with each other. Don't let them do so in like the tunnels and the stadiums. Some of these are really old stadiums. They don't have a lot of space, and so that's a lot of people. You mix in the alcohol, and it's not there's a lot of potential for chaos, and they just kind of wanted to get rid of it.
Yeah. I mean, another huge thing that changed, and I think you already mentioned some of the reasons for these changes, but ticket prices, right? Like, you talk about being able, like, he had a season pass. Like, admittedly, he talks about it in the movie, like, he makes a teacher's salary, doesn't have that much money. He's got enough for his season ticket and for, I think he said, a couple pints, like, every now and then, and he's happy, basically. But, like, you could afford it. It was approachable. Like, if you wanted to go into the terraces, it was like the equivalent, I think, of like, $1 or less, like, to go to a game. And it was just something you could do every single week and be a fan in that way. That's almost completely inaccessible to people in any sport, I get the feeling, in developed countries around the world today.
Yeah, the move has been towards the sporting game, the match as an event. And as a result, it's sort of driven up the desirability of going. And the movie touches on this a little bit too, right? There's this sense that only certain kinds of people watch football, They're these sort of working class kind of weirdos. It's not something respectable, educated people necessarily do, although part of a subtext of the movie is how everybody's actually kind of secretly watches the games. And that's something that they sort of, that gets discovered by, ad people, television people, that actually a lot of people do watch these games. A lot of people want to watch these games. And now we get into basic economics. Well, the more people who want to go, and again, as you start to move away from remove the hooligan element as the game itself, the atmosphere becomes a little bit more, what we'd say, family friendly. That sort of thing reinforces itself, that the atmosphere becomes more family friendly. So more people come and bring families as a result. Which, by the way, that means you're now buying 4 tickets as opposed to 1 ticket. But as a result, it becomes even more important for the club to make sure, this has to remain a family-friendly atmosphere. And so you sort of see these things perpetually building on each other, and it increases your demand. Your prices for your tickets go up. And these things just sort of keep going.
And at the same time, like the terraces, you're able to pack people in way more densely, too. So fewer people are able to attend in the stadium. So, yeah. Well,
yeah, that was the other big thing is the move towards the all-seaters, which once you the thing with the seat is once you have the seat, now you have a number that people can go in. As opposed to the bleachers, they would just keep selling tickets. Because you could just squeeze it, and you saw, like, when he goes to the game, or when he brings Sarah to the game for the first time, like, I mean, they're like, when they score, when things move, they are being thrown around.
Well, right. And that was what he described really in a way that I appreciated in the book, where, like, he had the feeling momentarily that he couldn't breathe. Like, this is how people die in a crush like that.
Yeah.
And that they didn't really put a too fine a point on it in the movie. You could see it happening, and having read the book, you can recognize it. They didn't have any voiceover narration, thankfully, in that movie, at least.
Yeah.
To say what happened. But yeah, like, it's like people were packed in so tightly, there wasn't room for your lungs to expand. You can't breathe. And if they had stayed like that much longer in that game, our 2 protagonists could have died. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, the part of the idea too. Remember, this is an English movie for an English audience, so they're going to recognize that. Like, they see it going, and that's recreating an experience that they would recognize. You don't have to explain that because they know what they're looking at. You're also talking about a society that is at that point less than a decade removed from Hillsborough, so they know the dangers. That's not something that's entirely beyond them. So they recognize that again in a way that we. Both because of our geographic and cultural distance, but also just in terms of time. Like, I'm not going to pretend, we're both too young to have even really paid attention, like, been unconscious of the Hillsborough Stadium disaster, right? Like, that was That was 1989. We were not of an age where we would remember that consciously.
Yeah. No, and it's actually funny you mentioned that, because I was just talking to my father-in-law. He was at the Yankees-Cubs game with us yesterday, and he knew about the Hillsborough disaster.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he knew about that, even as someone who never watched a minute of a soccer game until I started showing him sometimes a few years ago. Only baseball and football, maybe a little basketball, but never ever soccer. But he knew about that. Like, it was something that clearly gained headlines all over the world when something like that happens. Yeah.
96, 97 people. I think someone recently, one of the people who was injured there died as a result.
I remember that. Yeah.
I feel like we talked about that. Yeah. I mean, so
we did.
97 people. I mean, that's
right.
I think it was
the
like
death toll rose by one more. Yeah.
Yeah. It was like 92 or 93 the day of. Most of them were, were that day. So it was no doubt was a big story when it happened.
Oh yeah.
But stepping away from the violence aspect and the death and destruction of it, I mean, you hear the same lament about the changing nature of the crowd, the driving up of ticket prices, as some ways a tamer atmosphere in the stadium. You hear the same thing. People talk about baseball. I mean, people talk about American football. That kind of thing's been happening everywhere because sports has become much more mainstream acceptable. Sports fandom is much more mainstream acceptable. Arguably, fandom itself is more mainstream acceptable, which we can kind of get into. So there's an element there that, in a sense, part of the changes he's seeing are the same things that an American would also recognize in that regard. At least someone who regularly attended or attends sporting events, and they'll talk to you about, I used to be able to go to Yankee Stadium for a nickel, and that was a long time ago. But there were those things just don't exist anymore in those ways.
Yeah. So that's definitely part of it. I mean, some other potential causes for the feel of the game changing might be like the massive outside money that came in. We've talked about investment in Arsenal and Manchester City, and I think Newcastle more recently. Like, some of these clubs are getting a huge influx of money, getting even better talent, which again causes ticket prices to rise and kind of gentrifies the game a little bit. One thing I wanted your perspective on. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I would just add, the rising ticket prices is more of demand, especially once you get to the Premier League. The real money, which is what American sports are well aware of, the real money's in television. So in a sense, the reason, their income is, like, in a sense, it almost doesn't matter how many people go to the game. Like, they quite literally played an entire season without any fans. And financially, they were fine because it was television. Now, the lower down, even the Premier League table you go, teams are more reliant on their gate receipts. But it's really below the Premier League. Once you're in the Premier League, that cut of cash you get for just being in the league and being on television like that, I mean, it's a huge difference.
Oh, sure. So that is what I was leading to. So, like, the book focuses, and the movie that's based on it, that takes place in the same time period, like, that focuses on the changes from the 60s to the 90s. You're starting to talk about the changes from the 90s to the present day, which I feel like it's almost as significant, if not even more so, how much it's changed in that time period.
It definitely is a big change, and so the climax of the movie is Anfield '89. Arsenal beats Liverpool 2-0 at Anfield, wins the title in the last kick of the season. Thomas, it's up for grabs now. So that is arguably the most important game in the history of the English league, in the Football League, because. So we could flash back to a few weeks earlier is the Hillsborough Stadium disaster in the semifinals of the FA Cup. Liverpool's next game is supposed to be home to Arsenal, this game. They don't play it that weekend for what I think are obvious reasons. That game is then it has to be pushed back later in the season, and ends up being held after the end of the scheduled end of the season, even after the FA Cup final. Typically, the FA Cup final is the week after the end of the regular season, or the end of the Premier League season. Sometimes you see them kind of close to each other. Yeah, I think this year it was slightly different, or at least in a recent year it was different. But generally speaking, the FA Cup comes after the end of the Premier League or the Football League season. That year is played afterwards, which was a kind of a shocking thing. And it really was a big surprise that it was such an important game for the title. They talk about Arsenal had a huge lead in the league, and they have kind of it almost choked it away to the point where if they don't win by 2 goals, they had to win by 2 goals to win the title.
So can I pause you there for a second before you continue? Because this was a question that I had.
Okay.
He talks about in the movie, and I don't remember how he described it in the book, but he talks about needing to win by exactly 2-0. And I got the impression that 3-1 wouldn't have won them the title. Was that accurate, or did he not feel like going into the different tiebreaker factors? Was it just a plus 2 goal difference was all they need, or were home and away goals factoring in somehow, or they really needed to shut them out or something?
So the exact 2-0, does he say that in the movie, or is that in the book?
It's definitely in the movie. I made a note of it in the movie. It seemed like it might have been from the book also, but I can't say for sure. It might have been my previous viewing of the movie a few weeks earlier that I was remembering it from, but definitely in the movie.
Yeah, I was say because I pull up the table and there doesn't seem to be anything like by winning 2-0. Both the teams finished even on points and even on goal difference, and then Arsenal scored more goals than Liverpool, and so that would have been the title decider there.
Right. Okay.
So I think that might have been just upping the dramatic stakes for the movie's sake. I think
that, and also it might be easier to describe. You need to win 2-0 instead of there needs to be a 2-goal margin between the two teams. You need to win by 2 goals. Is a little bit harder to get across, probably. Yeah, but I didn't mean to fully derail us. So you were telling about this match and its significance.
Right. So obviously game moved, title decider. It's after the end of the season. So it's it's almost like a playoff game, given the stakes of it. And they put it on television, and one of the things that happens is it draws a massive number in terms of television ratings, which, I mean, people knew football was popular, and the FA Cup final was on TV, but like a lot of games weren't really on TV, or only very rarely. So like that's another change. Like the more the television is there, the less important it is to go to the game. It's to actually go to the game. But and they put it on TV, and it turns out a lot of people watched. Like a lot of people.
Well, you get the sense of that in the movie, right?
Yeah.
They're like showing not only is she watching at the party where Sarah is, you've got the 2 Arsenal main characters, the 2 Gooners that are watching in his flat because the game's at Anfield. You've got the student and his mom who are watching, who the mom is wearing a jersey too. Like she's become a fan. I like that part of it. He's drawn her in.
Right, you see all the people, and it's kind of everybody has kind of been drawn into this and been drawn into his obsession. But right, and there is there's a certain reality to that more people have been drawn into this, and that again gets the idea. Oh, this is a thing that people will watch. I mean, think about how much we wear the merch and the stuff, and the kits. They didn't sell jersey. Who would buy a jersey? Turns out a lot of people would buy a jersey once you start selling them, and so there's basically what they kind of discover is a lot of this untapped financial potential in the sport. A lot of this is coinciding as well with conversations that are happening behind the scenes among club leadership. 1991 is the creation of the Premier League that legally separates itself from the Football League and becomes this separate entity, markets its television rights that separately. The return of English clubs to Europe and the Premier League is really where a lot of these changes kick off. It's about a decade or so after that. Roman Abramovich, well, actually, early in the days of the Premier League, can't think of the man's name, but a rich local guy buys Blackburn Rovers and basically starts buying players. Blackburn Rovers wins the Premier League. It's one of the more shocking results in the history of the Premier League. Blackburn Rovers outlasted Manchester United to win the league. And then immediately sold off a bunch of the players because it turns out he wasn't he was rich, but he was, not to keep throwing money away like that. Manchester United commercializes everything and, dominates the league for a number of years. Chelsea is bought by Roman Abramovich, a Russian billionaire for whom, yeah, sure, I can keep spending money forever. Then you start to get into, later on, by the time you get to the 2010s, late 2000s, early 2010s, the Abu Dhabi royal family buying Manchester City. So the money and the potential and the global potential that, now these leagues, especially these European leagues, start to market themselves globally. And so all of that's happening not because of Anfield 89, but Anfield 89 is really a watershed moment for a lot of people. Like, people in the sport were already thinking these kinds of things, but it's a demonstration of some of the promises they're making to sponsors and broadcasters. No, a lot of people will watch this.
Right.
And here's the proof. A lot of people watch that.
Yeah.
So,
well, and it seems like that also kind of kicked off a sort of stratification, right? Like when you're reading the book, and you get a small sense of it in the movie. The movie doesn't cover anywhere near as many matches as the book does, but they're playing these teams that are just like random teams, like Derby County, right? Like, you get these teams that we don't see anymore, like Stoke City, like these random teams that would come up, and it seemed like it was more free flowing. And like the one that you were just talking about, they could win one season, why not? You put some money into them, but it seems like the money aspect really changed that. Like, the teams that were the most popular got the most for TV rights, probably in the early days, at least. Or was that always split evenly?
Well, it's I don't know the intricacies of the details of it, but it's the league that does the TV contract.
Okay.
But you mentioned Derby County. Derby County finished 5th that season. So here's your top 4 from that season. Arsenal wins the title, Liverpool in 2nd, Forest in 3rd,
sure.
Norwich City is 5th, and then 4th, and then Derby's 5th.
Yeah.
Manchester United was 11th. Aston Villa finished 17th. Manchester City isn't even in the league. Newcastle and West Ham were relegated that year. Like, I'm looking at the table, I can see these. The Premier League is what helps to create that stratification. And so we start, and then also the Champions League too, because it's the early 90s, right at the same time. They change it from the European Cup, or the European Champions Cup, which you had to win your league to participate. Well, now they start to open it up, partly because they know where's the real money. Well, the real money isn't in, the real money is when the big teams play each other. People want to see Bayern Munich and Real Madrid and Liverpool and Manchester United and Arsenal and Juventus and AC Milan. They want to see these big teams. They want to see them play each other. But what happens if you have a bad year and it's, this Spain is won by Deportivo La Coruña, and it's Blackburn in England and Dortmund in Germany. Dortmund's kind of big, but like you won by none of these big clubs. You run this big competition, and none of them are in. None of the clubs anyone wants to watch are in it. Well, with the new Champions League and the additional automatic berths, and I know Hornby talks about this. The fourth, the benefits of finishing in the top 4 in England, it didn't exist. But now all you have to do is finish in the top 4. I mean, you're always going to get one of the big teams in the top 4.
Right.
And they go and they start adding all of that money from those Champions League appearances. And it really does. It's more just there's much more money available at the top, and that winning becomes increasingly self-perpetuating. The more you win, the more money you get, which makes it more likely you'll win again. And so that's the thing you start to see.
No, that makes sense. One thing I wanted to ask you about, and I think I'm coming at this from 2 different angles, but basically the question is, and I'll explain the motivation after, but the question is, which American baseball team is Arsenal the most like? And there's 2 reasons for this. The first one is, as I was reading the book, the question occurred to me just because I know the history of American teams, not because I've ever been really super into baseball, but just that's our country's sport in the same way that football is England's sport, right? Where it's like, even if you don't follow it closely, you just get a sense of things growing up in it, stewing in it, from my entire childhood, right? And adulthood. But so that's one reason. But then also I got thinking of it watching the 2005 remake, which does shift from English football to American baseball, and wondering what other possibilities there might have been instead of the Boston Red Sox, hypothetically. What baseball team do you think might resemble Arsenal? And I'll throw out a few different axes against which we can maybe judge them. So there's the axis of like age of the club. Like, it's not going to be a super new club because Arsenal had been around for a little over 100 years at the time of the movie and the book, and now it's even more than that. how long were they at their stadium, right? They'd been at Highbury basically the entire time at that point. The character of a city like London is a very old city. Public perception of the team and the fans, which are two separate things, like is the team the bad guy? I got that sense from Nick Hornby in the book a little bit. The fans, like, are the fans like rough fans? Like, you kind of like, I have a picture in my head of a Yankees fan compared to like a Cubs fan is a very, specific thing and somewhat informed by movies and other culture. But, and also like how long it had been since their championship is obviously a direct reason that they might have picked the Red Sox, as it had been a while since they won the World Series when they started playing that movie. But who would you think would be an appropriate baseball team that's an analogous team?
I think you touch on a couple of important things in understanding why the Red Sox were chosen for the 2005 remake. It's particularly the championship drought, and because they make a big point of that, as you pointed out, the 2005 movie is a remake of the 1997 movie. It's two romantic comedies. It has almost no salience whatsoever with the book.
Right. Which is a funny progression, right? Like, you have this memoir that's almost entirely about football matches and little asides about his personal life, and you kind of piece together his personal life through the lens of these matches, right? And then how do you turn that into a movie, right? Well, you introduce characters, and Nick becomes Paul, and Paul, like, the movie is almost a sequel to the book in some ways. It like picks up where the book like left off for the most part. You see what he's like as an adult, and he begins this romantic relationship. She's our viewpoint character, and then that's the idea that, like you said, like spawned this remake. Is now this is an all-out like Farrelly Brothers like screwball romantic comedy that like Drew Barrymore is like top billing right alongside Jimmy Fallon, like in a way that Ruth Jamal, I don't know how her last name is pronounced, but she's not. Like, it's Colin Firth on the cover. It's really about him, and she's just kind of our viewpoint character and important, but not like driving most of the story, Yeah,
I believe he was certainly the big star. I believe he had done Pride and Prejudice, so he was kind of a well-known figure. I remember reading something where to prepare for the role, of course, he attends an Arsenal game or two with Hornby. And apparently Hornby would joke with his friends, "It's all right, I have to take Mr. Darcy to the football now." So Firth was a well-known figure. It certainly is a well-known actor, and his counterpart her career didn't quite take off in the same way, obviously. Actually, arguably, the only other actor in that movie who really takes off, I think, is Mark Strong, who is a proper Gooner.
Yes, I found that out.
Legitimate Arsenal fan. So, he's not the most handsome Arsenal fan. That's probably, at least not in a world where Idris Elba exists. But side note, that digression there. But I think they focus a lot in the movie on that the length of time between the championship, which he talks about 18 years, which is really more about, I think, his development from a child to this relatively young adult.
Or lack of development,
or lack of development, right? And in some ways, the title, Anfield '89, becomes a sort of a cathartic moment where it's almost like I've accomplished this thing. Like it's kind of a weird thing. Like, he saw from an early age the '71 double team. He saw a team that won the league and the FA Cup, and they make references to '71, but he never talks about like, I remember when they won the trophy and we ran out in the streets, and so he never has any of that. So '89 becomes sort of like the culmination of all of my years of fandom. They finally accomplished the thing.
Yeah.
So I think that drought plays into the obsessiveness. And in that regard, when you're making a baseball movie in 2005, the only choices are the Red Sox or the Chicago Cubs, who of course were well known, were famous for their extensive droughts. In terms of the stadium and the time there, I mean, that's not particularly unique when it comes to English soccer, because they were all in old stadiums. Like, none of them were new.
Okay.
They might have been redone.
That's
so there's nothing particular. It is an interesting thing to look at Highbury and where it was, and sort of how it's like literally in the middle of a neighborhood.
Well, yeah. That is kind of what I'm saying, though. It's like, it's not unique to Arsenal, but it is more unique to certain cities in the US that wouldn't feel like that kind of small town, like North London feeling,
Yeah. I mean, in terms of thinking about, the city, I get hung up on the fact there's no really good analog in the United States to what London is to Britain. Like in terms of as a cultural, political, economic capital, nothing in the United States compares. And partly because we think of New York as the analog to London in a lot of ways, but frankly, so is Los Angeles.
Right, and so Washington, D.C.
So is Washington. So is Chicago. Yeah. Like Philadelphia, Houston. We're start rattling off cities here. I mean, I looked at it once. London is a little bit bigger than New York City. Liverpool is a fairly large city within England. In terms of size, Liverpool is roughly equivalent to Indianapolis.
Yeah.
Like if the third biggest city in America was Indianapolis, that would be a very different kind of country, wouldn't it?
Well, I guess what I'm thinking of, though, is like the age and kind of, I don't know, history of the city. And like, as I was thinking about this for myself, part of why I would rule out Chicago is because of a Chicago fire. Right? Like, yeah, Mrs. O'Leary's cow tips over a lantern. The whole city basically gets burned down and rebuilt, where you don't have like the really old architecture. Now, that was still like recent enough that, yeah, it's still before the Cubs and Arsenal were formed, but it maybe doesn't have that same feeling as you get, in like cities that have just been around for centuries,
Yeah, right. I mean, now the comparison point is to like London is a really old city. Well, they're all old cities in England compared to America. Like it's just it's in that way that doesn't.
But that's a particular way where Boston maybe does fit, right?
To me, I think what makes Boston fit. I think you talk about sort of the character of the city, or maybe in this case, the way the city is caricatured. Mm-hmm. So I imagine. Again, I haven't seen it, and I'm not going to see it. I imagine there's a lot of actors dropping their eyes, talking about how they're going to park the car to go see the Sox, right? There's this sense there's this sense of character of the kind of person who lives in Boston. And you could do that with, you can do that with all parts of England in that way. I think Boston is an easy one to exaggerate in that regard. But I think you could do that with a lot of different American cities. I think you can do that with Chicago, as you said. I think there is a definable Chicago accent. Now, let's be honest, most of it is, the super fans talking about the Bears, and with a
little bit of Blues Brothers in there, yeah.
Yeah, I think you could do that with a city like Chicago. I mean, I look at it because you asked me this question. A good analog to Arsenal. Now, granted, what would be true in 2005 versus what would be true in 2025. The team that popped in my mind, been around for a long time, has a history of success at various points within its existence. Comes from a fairly distinctive city, has been at not the same stadium, but roughly the same location for almost its entire existence, and has, as of right now, a championship length that's about 20 years. To me, it's the St. Louis Cardinals. Which I know as a Cubs fan, I'm sure. If you were a longtime Cubs fan, I know that would be twisting the knife on you.
I'm learning. We can talk about this maybe in our next current events episode that isn't film studies. But yeah, I've been thrown into the deep end of Cubs fandom this year, and yeah, I know about the rivalry. I don't feel it yet. I'm starting to feel the Spurs rivalry a little bit. I don't feel the St. Louis one yet, but yeah.
But I think the Cardinals are a really good example there because they've been around for a long time. They've won a bunch of World Series, and they're not the Yankees or the Dodgers. Right. Which I think the Dodgers make a fascinating analog to Liverpool, but that's another conversation for another time. But they've got eras of success, but their last title was 2006, was 20 years ago. So in terms of it's been 18 years. Actually, yeah, it's been 19 years as a matter of fact. Yeah. And this Cardinals team isn't going to win the World Series either. So the Cardinals to me would kind of be interesting. Now, can you make fun of St. Louis in the way we make fun of Boston? Not really, but St. Louis is a city with its own unique charm and character.
Well, so what if we were to shift gears and instead of talking about what would you pick if you were if you were translating English football to American football and for the purpose of the movie and the dramatic purposes of the movie, what about just the character of the team, right? Like, we know it's not the Yankees who are known for winning all the time. Like, I think that aspect is more like Liverpool, which I got that sense after reading the book. I never really thought that way about Liverpool, but it's like they're the team who always wins. Like, they mentioned that in the movie, and it's definitely there on the page too.
It depends on when you're talking about. So when they're talking about 89, the 1980s are dominated by Liverpool. They win a trophy every year except like one or two. And the 1 year they didn't win a trophy and they finished second in the league. They lost the FA Cup final. They lost the League Cup final. Like, they were on the verge of winning it. They won like 3 European titles. They were the team of the 80s, starting in the late 70s and going forward. Anfield 89, I mean, they turned around, I think they won the league the next year, right, in 1990. But like, Anfield 89 was kind of the first real, the God bleeds. Like, they can't. I mean, Arsenal beat them 2-0 in Anfield. Like,
right.
But you didn't do that.
Right.
Depending on when you come in, you hit the Premier League, and Liverpool by that point has kind of drifted away and then you're talking about Manchester United.
Yeah.
Who has just been a force up until about 10 plus years ago when Sir Alex Ferguson retired. Since then, we've really sort of seen Manchester City become that kind of dynastic monster. There isn't a really good analog, I think, to the Yankees. It sort of depends who you talk to. A friend of mine, I'll defend Derby County here, a friend of mine from graduate school was a longtime Derby County fan, and we were talking about it, and as an Arsenal fan, like, he looks at Arsenal sort of the same way. They've never been relegated. They've won the third most titles in England. They've won the most FA Cups, but they're also there with Liverpool, who has won the title a bunch of times throughout their history. Manchester United, who has won a bunch of titles as well. Right. They're sort of, they're at the top, have been at the top of the league for so long. They're fun exercises, and to me, it's really an interesting question about how you define what makes these clubs. I kind of want to touch back on that perspective from the outside, because I know you were a bit struck by, and I was a bit struck by too the first time, the very different reputation Arsenal had when he's watching in the 70s and 80s versus the reputation we have for Arsenal now. So what do you see as the reputation of Arsenal from that period?
Well, yeah, I mean, so right now, I don't really have much of a perception of them. I mean, it's like they're just kind of one of the teams that is popular outside of England, right? But to read a brief excerpt from the book, I mean, he says, "How is your psyche affected when you commit yourself for a lifetime to a team that everybody loves to hate? Are football fans like the dogs that come to resemble their masters?" Like, he's worried that he's going to become a bad person because he roots for Arsenal. That was so foreign to me. Where is that coming from?
So there's two things that are going on here, I think. Yeah. One, Hornby is a writer. He is by nature very self-reflective, which is part of why he becomes a writer. He's also writing a memoir, which is itself very self-reflective and slightly self-indulgent. This is, now I'm really going to pull, here's a fun comparison I'm going to pull out of my backside. I imagine you aren't terribly familiar with the Confessions of St. Augustine. Probably not.
No.
Yeah, it's okay. He's it's his declaration of faith where he's talking about himself and confessing his sins. And he talks about one of the worst sins that he ever committed. He once snuck into an orchard and stole a peach off a tree and ate it. And you're like, that's it?
I seem to recall a Simpsons episode where Marge feels incredibly guilty about like sampling a grape in the grocery store one time.
Yeah. And it's that sense, right, that we kind of are like, oh my God, what is this one small event? An event that if you mention to anyone else, they're like, that's it? Yeah, but of course, in our heads, it lives large, and so there's a sense of I hate to say self-indulgent because it's a memoir. It is, of course, it's self-indulgent, but like there's a little bit of that sort of like he sort of pushes it far. Like, oh my God, everyone hates Arsenal, and we'll talk about why in a second. But everyone hates Arsenal because they, because of the way they play. If I support them, what does that mean about me? Am I a bad person? Okay, let's talk a little bit about this. In this era, up through the early 90s, or through the mid 90s, even into the late 90s, Arsenal was generally known as a solid defensive team. That chant 1-0 to the Arsenal was a taunt. If Arsenal scored, the game was over. Because you were not going to score on Arsenal. That was they were they won every game 1-0. They didn't win every game 1-0, but 89 they scored the most goals in the league. But Arsenal was going to be defensive, which is generally, again, reputation. He compares them to West Ham and to Chelsea. They're dynamic, swashbuckling, the players with the long hair, it's the 70s. So they're the fun, cool teams who score a bunch of goals and then get relegated. Arsenal is the dour, solid defensive team. They're strict in discipline, and of course being more physical because they're more defensive. This is all being a bit overplayed. Yes, they were a very good defensive team. That was sort of the root of who they were. And the root of their success was their defensive solidity. Being good defensively does not make you necessarily villains. I mean, there are, again, some of this is also within London. Arsenal is winning in a period where none of the other London clubs are. So Arsenal, especially when you're surrounded by your local rivals, Spurs, West Ham, he lives out near Reading, I think was the team near him. We know about Palace and Fulham and Chelsea, and I just name all the London clubs.
Yeah.
Well, Arsenal's the only one that's got any trophies, so they must be the bad guys. So I think there's a little bit of that going on, too. Now, what makes that so fascinating to me is what changes, talk about the changes between 1991 and today, is Arsene Wenger. And Arsene Wenger shows up, and Arsenal becomes this more expressive, free-flowing offensive side. He brings in foreign players. Patrick Vieira, Robert Pires, Dennis Bergkamp, Thierry Henry. I mean, good chunk of them are black too. Ian Wright, David Rocastle, all these, which carries in England
Rocky,
in the late 80s, early 90s. Yeah. Rocky Rocastle, yeah. But those guys were, Wrighty, Rocastle were they were from London. They were locals. But I mean, especially starts bringing in these foreigners. And again, sort of plays the Arsenal's the foreign club. And there is an element of insularity to English culture, the wee Britain or the little England sentiments. There's an element of that, especially as you get further and further away from cosmopolitan London. And then you get to this whole north-south thing. But so it's funny that Arsenal's reputation in some ways has changed because they were for the longest time this sort of solid, dour defensive club, and then under Wenger, oh no, we play attacking football. That's what we do. We attack, we score, we win 5-2. We're gonna run you out of the building. So it's kind of fascinating how the reputation of the club has shifted in some ways.
Well, yeah, and so that makes it sound like Arteta is kind of a return to form. That's what we've seen the last couple of years is best defense in the league, struggling to score goals. That's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I mean, we say struggling to score goals, and they're still. I mean, this is where the stratification comes in. Then, in the sense, Arsenal's Arsenal isn't competing against the 20 teams at the table; they're competing against the other 2, 3, or 4 teams that could actually win the title.
Right. And
so compared to Liverpool, oh my God, well, it's we can't buy a goal compared to most of the league.
Southampton this season, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't do it this past season, but I mean, think about that stretch the previous year where we were dropping 5 and 6 goals on teams.
Right.
That goes into the stratification of it. Yeah. And so the idea is that we're not comparing ourselves to the league. We're comparing ourselves to Liverpool and City because those are the only clubs that we're actually worried about.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. So there is no easy answer as far as an American team that's close to Arsenal. I mean, I'm glad that you talked me down from my perception, taking him at face value that Arsenal were the bad guys at some point in the past. But that's good to know.
I mean, and remember also that there are 92 clubs in the football league, the top 4 levels. I mean, you see a bunch of clubs in the league in 1989. You see a bunch of clubs in the league that, aren't in the Premier League anymore. But no one had ever who thought about Brighton? Who thought about Sunderland or Brentford? Where the where the heck was Brentford? Like them being in the league is the aberration in some ways. Derby County's won the league a couple of times. Like some of these teams have histories, and so the longer you go, it's interesting. I've also been watching Welcome to Wrexham, their 4th season where they're in League One.
Yeah. Spoilers.
And well, it's the 4th season. This all happened last year.
I know.
Here's your real spoiler: they actually win promotion. I knew that happened. But like they're playing with all of these teams, and I'm just looking at the list of their opponents, going, I saw them in the Premier League. I saw them in the Premier League. I saw them in the Premier League. And now they got promoted to Championship, and you look at the Championship roster, and it's like there's 22 teams in Championship, and I think in the 20 years I've been watching, I think I've seen like 16 or 17 of them in the Premier League.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Over the last 20. Like, it's interesting that that's becoming more stratified. We talked about how the 3 teams that got promoted are the most likely to go back down. That's what happened last year. They used to never happen. Now it's happened it's happened like 3 times in the last decade, 2 or 3 times, which is a lot historically. But if you look at the 3 teams that came up this past year, I mean, that's probably your 3. That's a good chance those are your 3 going back down again. So again, that stratification and being in the Premier League is so important financially and so beneficial financially.
All right. So if we're to look at another theme in the book and certainly the movie, it's really in many ways kind of a reflection on what fandom really is, and specifically sports fandom, although I think a lot of it would easily apply to someone who's really into comics or movies or anything else too. It's just like that really strong degree of fandom, I guess, is the most polite way to possibly put that. So before we talk about Nick/Paul and his fandom, I wanted to get a sense of where you and I fall on that spectrum. So, like, for instance, with his recall of these matches, like, dozens and dozens of matches that he's going into extreme detail on, as I'm reading that, I imagine you not too far off from that, because I hear when we're talking like on the show week to week, you talk to a far greater degree of detail, even matches earlier in the same season that I've mostly forgotten the finer points of at this point. Right? By a few matches later, I've moved on. Like, so how do you personally compare to him? Like, where do you fall?
Well, if we think of it as a spectrum with Hornby on one end and the guy who, checks the scores on his phone every couple of months, like, oh, hey, we're at the top, and only pays attention and if they're in line to win anything. I mean, I'm certainly closer to Hornby in that regard. We give up a couple hours every weekend to sit on Sunday nights to sit and record this. Yeah.
And that's in addition to actually watching the matches every week, which is at least another 2 to 4 hours depending on the week. Yeah.
I would say certainly I'm a little obviously closer to him in that regard. I mean, I guess it depends a lot on how you approach it. For me, I'm never going to reach the level of obsession that he has for Arsenal, in large part because I actually follow a lot of different sports. And so I'm never going to latch on to a single club or a single team in that way and have that memory. Also, too, I mean, I've never seen Arsenal play in person.
Okay.
I'm not going to, and there's no, I live in the United States and I have a job, and I teach. I have a job where I have the time I get off is in the summer when Arsenal is also not playing.
Right, those months that don't exist to Nick,
and I don't feel like dropping a couple, however much money it is to go watch a preseason game when they tour the U.S. If they were in Texas, if they, but like I'm not going to Charlotte to watch them, play an exhibition against Chelsea or whatever they did. Like that doesn't do anything for me. Would I like to go to the Emirates someday? Absolutely. It'd be fantastic. I hope that'll happen someday, but as of now, I've never seen them live. Whereas I have, seen the Yankees live many times. I've seen the Giants play live several times, the Islanders, like other teams I follow. I've been in the stadium, and there's something about being present that makes those memories much more vivid.
Sure.
You ask about
I
mean, you ask about the memory of events. I can sort of do it with a couple Arsenal games. There's a few here or there, but I have some vivid memories and things attached to like the Yankees or the Giants, partly because of how long I followed them. The Yankees in particular, I like one of the things he does here really well in the book is he sort of ties his own life to what's going on. And I think into the movie, there's that moment where Paul is supposed to, he interviews for the position, a promotion, and he ends up not getting it. And then Arsenal loses later that day. And he says he's only mad. He's not mad about the job. He's only mad. He's only mad about the football. He is mad about the job, even if he doesn't want to admit it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a way that like we tie our lives. We use these sorts of things as markers to our lives. And so I have memories. I mean, a lot of this is age related. I was, 8th grade through early high school during the period where the Yankees won the World Series 3 times in 4 out of 5 years. Like that was, so I can connect, and particularly in the month of October, because of course that's when all the playoff stuff happened, but I can connect a lot of feelings, thought, like watching, if I were to watch a highlight of the 1999 World Series, it's going to trigger different things in my mind, some of which are connected to the baseball and other things aren't. They're just connected to other things, like what it was like to be that age and that space with those people at that time. Yeah. There's that memory aspect of it, too, that he's kind of touching on, even though in his case, he's obviously very explicitly connecting it to Arsenal. So I think in this way, I know the book is about Arsenal, or about his fandom of Arsenal. I think anyone who's ever considered themselves a fan of something can look at that and recognize themselves in it. Like they can see that experience, even if the particulars of it don't necessarily mesh. Like, he talks about the importance of his parents' divorce and how that connected to his fandom. My parents are still very happily married. I've never experienced that, and yet I can still be that. Now, again, for me, also, when it comes to sports fandom, this is sort of my not work thing. There's my work stuff, which I do and I take seriously and is important to me. And then here's where I can sort of cut loose in a way that I can't do with, and I can experience it in a different way. So for me, it's a little bit of compartmentalization as well. So that's sort of
like what Paul says when the student asks to go to Highbury with him, and he says, my mom needs me to go with a responsible adult, and he says, yeah, but that's just the thing. That's like the one time every week that I'm not a responsible adult. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And there's that element of it. For me, that's a time I can sort of let go of that sort of professionalism that I have to have in a work environment. And I for me, psychologically, I find it's helpful because it's easier to I feel baseball a lot of this. Baseball is a metaphor for life because you play every day. You can't get too excited when you win. Can't get too upset when you lose. Like it kind of helps you maintain that even keel and work, even the bad days. Well, you know what? We're going to play again. It's okay. We'll play again tomorrow. Mm-hmm. Some days you win, some days you lose, some days it rains. So that's kind of to me, that's sort of been, I wouldn't say like it's been a deliberate thing, but it's a way I've sort of helped the two things kind of blend together and help each other, even as they're compartmentalized to me anyway.
Sure.
But again, I'm also I wouldn't call myself a writer, certainly not like Hornby. I haven't written a book or anything like that. But I mean, I'm engaged in a very similar kind of self-reflective, reflective or inward-looking profession at a lot of times. So I probably overthought this more than most people have. So I don't know. You're in a very different kind of space. I don't know. How do you think about that as being fandom?
Yeah, I mean, so it's funny the way that my life has gone in this regard. It's like almost kind of like the exact mirror image of his, where like when he was a kid not following football, I was probably until very recently, that was when I was the most into sports. Like I had big collections of sports cards. I would watch like the Bulls was a big thing. I was growing up in the Chicago suburbs and the Bulls were on fire. That was the Michael Jordan era. Like, definitely watching a lot of basketball in the house. My parents were big Bears fans, so that would always be on the background. So even though I wasn't particularly into football, I kind of, was familiar with it. I went to Wrigley Field a bunch. I saw a bunch of Cubs games. I started playing baseball, and soccer was just kind of there. I enjoyed it, but I didn't pursue it as long as I pursued baseball. And then it kind of fell away. And what's funny is it fell away like around when you're talking about like those Yankees World Series years, which was when we both moved to the Hudson Valley, for you moving back to the Hudson Valley, but for me moving to the Hudson Valley. And it's funny to think that there's like an alternate universe where like I got into the Yankees as much as you were into them. And like this whole journey that I've been on the last few years happens so much longer ago. It completely changes the entire trajectory of my life. But it's like that's kind of happening now with me, where between like late middle school to high school through 3 years ago, I couldn't be bothered about sports. I didn't watch the Super Bowl. Like, I never sought out having a game on at any time at all. I couldn't tell you who any of the players were, aside from like, I knew who Derek Jeter was. He was still like, he was still playing for long enough. Like the players who were in the Yankees when I was, when I was watching them sometimes, like were still in the game. Like when A-Rod started playing, like I knew who A-Rod was. Like there's a passing familiarity to the people who are in public consciousness. Right. But not watching it at all, socially going to a game either at work because, my work would have tickets to the Mets game or the Yankees game or whatever it was. And, sometimes just going with family because they'd want to go see a Yankees game or a Mets game. Like I do stuff like that. And it was mostly baseball because that's what my extended family is the most into. But that was really it, like all the way hard into the opposite side of the spectrum. But then at the period in my life where like for Nick, well, for Paul, because that's where we actually see it on screen. It wasn't really in the book, but where he's able to like kind of release his like clench on the team a little bit and start actually living life. Right. It was only after I had my family that I have now rekindled that. And it started off with, watching Arsenal with you. I did the documentary on Amazon. I watched that and I started watching every single match that entire season. We do the show. I've now seen like 3 complete seasons. I've seen like every minute that was publicly televised of Arsenal playing in those 3 seasons. And then toward the end of the season, somehow I started getting into baseball too. And now it's like I see at least part of almost every Cubs game. And I'm listening to that podcast and like getting into baseball in a way that I just never have been. And it's like the background is there. I played the game for long enough. I'm familiar enough with it. But there's still plenty that I don't know. I don't have as much catching up to do as I did with soccer. Yeah. But it's there. And so we talked a little while ago about the St. Louis rivalry. It's like, well, just watching the games, just listening to the 10-minute daily official podcast from the Cubs, like, I'm there. Like I'm able to talk baseball with people again. Like it all, like my baseball fandom kind of started with a hat. It was kind of funny. Like I got a Cubs hat that I hadn't in a long time. I'd stopped wearing sports team hats for the Yankees or the Cubs or anyone because I didn't want to be dragged into a conversation I wasn't going to be equipped to have. But I'm there now. I can have the conversation. Someone talks baseball. I know enough. It's cool. It's fun. It's like in a lot of ways, it's like what Paul talks about, and I think we see it with Paul. Nick talks about it with Paul in the movie. We kind of see it in effect where just having that fandom that so much of the country shares, and enough of his peers when he's a kid. And I see it with my son in school where like trading soccer cards is like a big thing for him. Like that's been a way for him to relate to all these other kids in his class who he might not otherwise have anything in common with, right? But it's like that's something that sports are for a lot of people, where they don't care about movies, they don't care about like what's on TV or whatever, but sports, like you'll talk to them for hours about their favorite team and what's going on with it, and they're very opinionated. And that's the more things you have like that where you are familiar, you relate to humanity as a whole better. And it's that's been fun.
Yeah, sports has sort of been recognized for a long time as sort of one of the appropriate or socially acceptable forms of male bonding. Like it's, and there's some jokes that come out of it, but like when Arsenal scores and we're in the pub, there's a lot of hugging. There's a lot of hugging. And this isn't like, weirdos copping the field, so to speak, because the girls around. Almost exclusively men. There's some women that attend regularly, but it's mostly just dudes. But it's the kind of thing like you can do that and show that kind of emotion, and it allow a healthy outlet for the more aggressive parts of the male psyche, et cetera, all those kinds of things. It does sort of create a very easy form of conversation, or start conversation, because everybody, not everybody, but you walk around somewhere with the Cubs hat, and you can get smaller and smaller subcultures. I ran into the other last week. I was flying and I was wearing a shirt that said Colgate on it. Colleges do this a lot of, shirts that said Colgate on it. Guy stops me and goes, "Hey, did you go to Colgate?" Yeah. He goes, "Yeah, my brother-in-law is the golf coach." Like, just that shirt, and all of a sudden, like, we had a 30-second conversation as we're getting off the plane, but yeah. Otherwise, who is this person? Well, why would he have ever spoken? There's this sort of weird kind of connection there and I think what's interesting to me, because you weren't a sports fan all this time, but I think you absolutely would be considered a fan. I mean,
oh yeah,
you and I met not talking about baseball, we talked about Star Wars, right?
Oh yeah.
And I think we've seen in a lot of ways that kind of publicly displayed fandom has sort of expanded. To me, like how many more T-shirts do we see out there for Star Wars or for comic book characters? I mean, Marvel's done so much for that. Or increasing amounts of merchandise connected to all of these movie and TV series. It wasn't even think back when we were in high school, that wasn't really a thing, was it?
No, not as much. No, you were definitely like shoved into the corners, like, oh, he's a nerd, something that was
nerd stuff. Yeah. Stereotypically, it's done by the jocks who were that way about sports, but it's fine. It's fine.
Right.
But see, I never. Yeah, of course, that's the '80s. You and I did not. That was never my experience in school.
Yeah, no, not really. I was friends with the jocks, even though I didn't play sports anymore in high school. Yeah. No, it wasn't really like that. But yeah, no. I mean, before sports, no, that definitely was my obsession. I mean, I underwent a project to read every single Spider-Man issue to that point in time, right? That was like over 40 years of comics, and I did it. Like that obsession has now certainly transferred over. I mean, I would call my fandom of Arsenal, and I'm almost there with the Cubs, honestly, but I would borderline call it an obsession. I mean, but that term got thrown around like in the marketing I saw for both Fever Pitch movies, right? Like, do you agree with that? Do you think Nick and Paul are obsessive?
I mean, I think they're different.
Okay.
Nick is a little bit, but he's also, there's an exaggerated nature to what he's doing because it's about, for him, he's using fandom as sort of a window into his own psyche.
Right.
Paul is a character.
Right.
Like, Paul has to be drawn in a fairly broad way, like, because he has to sort of serve as this kind of like he's a physical manifestation of all the most unhealthy way, most of the most unhealthy ways you could be a sports fan. I mean, they make fun of the Arsenal boxers, but like, please, like, I mean, I don't have Arsenal boxers, but that's like the least surprising thing about it. Like, of course he has Arsenal, that doesn't, but but even a little bit, because I some parts I'd reread. I mean, he talks, it's right at the beginning of the book. Hornby talks about how he's lying in his bed and his wife is like, "Oh, what are you thinking about?" And he's like, and I says, I always lie and say something like, "Oh, the Labour Party," or, something, the war overseas. And he goes, "No, I'm not. Trying to figure out who our lineup is for Saturday." Like, and let's be honest, having time. Have you had that moment where you're sitting there and your wife says, "Hey, Dad, what's going on?" And you're saying to yourself, "Well, I can't tell him the truth," which is that, why are we batting him cleanup?
Yeah.
Like, and I think that's just sort of, again, sort of the male. I think there's an element of maleness or masculinity to that. Not obviously we know that plenty of women can be sports fans and Arsenal fans and all, but I think there's something about the way our brains work is part of that. In terms of their obsession,
you bring so you help me realize one way in which I'm not obsessive, which is when I'm not watching a match or preparing specifically for the show. It's not something that I, at least yet, and I realize this definitely may happen, I'm not putting it past myself, but at least not right now. I'm not thinking about Arsenal a lot when I'm not watching them. It's maybe a stray thought here and there, but it's not like, if you ask me at any point in time, what are you thinking about? I could probably honestly say most of the time it isn't a sports team yet.
Yeah. And I think too, what makes Paul more the character, and Nick sort of says this about himself, but I think there's a slight exaggeration, is and what makes them obsessive is that it takes over their life it takes over your life to an extent you almost can't think about, your life outside of that. And they sort of play that up, right? Like, you know, and Sarah talks about that, right? Like, where you're going to be, next October, but you can't tell me what we're going to do next week. And he goes, yeah, but they have a schedule.
Well, yeah. But even more than that, though, to your point, I mean, it's not only that. She was saying, if you take away Arsenal, like, what do you have left? Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to remember if that's from one of the Fever Pitch movies where that is said explicitly, and that there's a chance that was Drew Barrymore talking to Jimmy Fallon. And I feel like that was, it sounds like the second one. I don't recall that line. So maybe that is what's going on there. But in at least one of those two movies, they say that, like, well, okay, take away the team. Who are you? What is there left for you? Which is definitely a valid criticism of people who get obsessive about something.
Right. And that's kind of the thing too. There's a tribal nature to it. We love to wear the shirt and the badge because you're what's the Dennis Bergkamp line? A club is about somewhere you belong. Yeah. We love that idea. It's just, again, the obsession comes from when this becomes the only way you talk about your identity or think about your identity. Yeah. And, this is a fun thing I do, and for some, there are people there. Obviously, like I've never once seen them outside of the pub. We know very little about each other other than we're both Arsenal fans. But sometimes that's okay. Like we don't need to know anything else. We don't need to talk about our jobs or politics or everybody complains about work, right? I mean, what's interesting about this is when you start, we talked about how sports becomes an entryway to sort of meeting new people because I've never met this guy before, but he was. He is wearing a Spurs shirt. And so we, had a little chit chat back and forth. Okay. Yeah. But here, these are people who, I see every week in some respects. And sometimes, okay, we'll talk about the lineup and, why isn't this guy starting? And, we can't buy a goal but the defense has been good. But I mean, that conversation starts to stray into, work's been crazy or, somebody's kids did something my kids did this crazy thing last week. And so it becomes that entry because you see those people more often, you can sort of build something a little bit more in depth than just talking about the team. Kind of really wandered off of there, but that's kind of that, again, there's a lot of different ways to think about the notion of fandom that I think the book is really good in that. I think the movie plays that a little bit more for laughs, but that's really because it's a romantic comedy, which is fine. I don't want to say it's the only way they could have told that story, but I think it's as you point out, Sarah acts as an audience surrogate for us to sort of help us. She's there to make fun of it, but she's also being drawn in at the same time.
Well, right. And, it's funny, like if you'd asked me before watching the movie, like between reading the book and watching the movie, what do I imagine the movie is going to be like? I would have absolutely no idea how you would adapt this. Mm-hmm. And, clearly turning him into a character instead. And thankfully they didn't do the voiceover narration. There is voiceover narration in the remake. It's not from the perspective of the main character. It's from an older guy who has a season ticket, like adjacent to his family's season tickets and stuff. But yeah, I'm not a big fan of that as a mechanism, but like, it's hard to imagine the movie without that if you were adapting this, and it worked. It did a good job. I think to me, Paul comes across as far less obsessive than Nick, like you said, right? Where he has to be well-rounded. Like you have to see more of him than just his recollection of these events in Arsenal's history. But yeah, I mean, it's funny. Like to me, he doesn't come across as obsessive. Like he is a big fan, and he definitely orients his life around the team, is where it maybe gets him into trouble, right? Like you were talking about, with like living his life by the Arsenal fixture list, which is something he talks about in the book too, where like you just can't plan anything with him on a weekend because, well, the game may get rescheduled. That happens, and they change it, especially in the era of television he was talking about, where, you don't know. It could be the next day because they had to bump something because of whatever, and they'll just change the games around.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, he comes across as more or less like a normal guy, stunted development. Like definitely that's why he's the cool teacher, because he's not that far removed from the kids who he's teaching. Yeah. But I mean, overall though, more or less a normal guy. Now you take that into the remake of it, devoid of kind of the emotional core of the book that Nick Hornby adapted his own book into that movie, right? So it feels very genuine and authentic. Now you take it into like, you know, screwball comedy territory with the Farrelly brothers, and, you know, Jimmy Fallon is like over, like way off the deep end. Like
Jimmy Fallon is Jimmy
nuts.
Fallon. That's a
yeah. So, you know, with that, you know, you kind of see that a little bit more, where like he really is like a nuts fan in a way I don't relate to as much, honestly, you know.
Yeah, I think I imagine he's more of sort of the caricature. Like, I think part of that too is just you think about the almost decade there, like when you talk about someone who's an obsessed fan and what that looks like. I think that too is probably the difference between an American and a British audience. Like, to a British audience, like Arsenal underwear is like, who does that? Crazy people do that. But to an American, like we sort of said, like Red Sox underwear, hey, okay.
We're more accepting of that. Yeah.
So you got to like if you want to, you know, the obsessed fan, he's got to have everything, you know.
Yeah, no, and he does, like, and that's something that they talk about, like, you know, every last thing in his apartment has like a Red Sox logo on it, except the toilet paper, which has the Yankees on it. But I'm sure you can imagine.
That's fair. There's a weird little bit to that where at a certain point you almost go so far that it would be like, you know what? I'd be disappointed if you didn't have Yankees toilet paper. I just.
Yeah. So moving along, there were some specific things that I wanted to ask you about that just in the tradition of the show, right? Like, I'm still very much learning about soccer and Arsenal, and maybe I don't really have too many baseball questions from the remake. So we'll keep this to the book and the first movie. But so one question is, and so again, like I'll excerpt the book here a little bit. So a couple of years later, during an FA Cup semifinal between Everton and Southampton at Arsenal, ellipsis, right? So Everton and Southampton played an FA Cup semifinal at Highbury, right? Which seems weird to me. I haven't seen that happen aside from, the final is played at Wembley. Okay. And they'll announce, like, for the Champions League, which stadium that's going to be at, right? But the regular matches are always at one or the other team's stadium. Is that just down to the size? Like, does Everton or Southampton not have a big enough stadium to accommodate the crowd for an FA Cup tie like that?
Oh, well, if they did an Arsenal Stadium was not very big. That's why they built the Emirates. So no, by the time when you get to the semifinals of the FA Cup, those were always held at a neutral site, ostensibly neutral site.
Oh,
okay. The final would be at Wembley. Now, in the last couple of years, they've actually shifted that. Well, a few years ago, they actually shifted it so that the semifinals were held at a home site. But now they've shifted it where the semifinals are held at Wembley.
Oh, okay.
And so you'll do the semifinal for the FA Cup, the semifinals and the final will both be at Wembley. It used to be that we'd go other places. So, for example, go back to Hillsborough. Hillsborough was the home stadium of Sheffield Wednesday. And yet Liverpool was playing, right. I forget who they were playing. It wasn't Sheffield Wednesday. They were playing somebody else, but it was a neutral site for that semifinal. So, if you think Southampton's on the south, near the coast, Everton's up in Liverpool, Arsenal Stadium is kind of is neutral territory between them. So that was.
Is that because it was a single leg, and like in the quarterfinals and round of 16, it's like two legs, and so you play home and you play away, or no?
Well, no, FA Cup has always been a single knockout. Now, they've had, and they've only recently got rid of them, the replays, where if you tied, you would then play, you would play. So, like this year in the FA Cup, Arsenal drew Manchester United at home. In years past, they drew, 1-1? They would play a replay. They play another game in Old Trafford. And it used to be that they would keep going and playing games until one of them won a game. I think the record is 7 replays for one round. But increasingly, because for all kinds of reasons, fixture congestion, all of that stuff, they've been cutting back on those, and so that's why you get to the penalty shootouts and that kind of thing. So they're advancing more quickly,
right?
But the FA Cup is a single leg knockout all the way through the final. The only exception is the League Cup semifinals are 2 legs.
Oh, okay.
But otherwise, everything is is theoretically at least one off at a team stadium until you get to the semifinals and the final, which are now all held at Wembley.
Okay. So the next thing, and this was kind of actually a really big question because it really impeded my understanding of exactly what happened at Hazel. And I'm going to say Hazel because that's what ChatGPT told me to say from an English-speaking perspective. So I don't really know, and ChatGPT has a much better chance of getting it right than I do on my own. So I'll say Hazel. But without reading the excerpt that I have, which is actually really, really long, and we're already running pretty long for this episode. But basically, running was something they said was what happened that led to the Hazel disaster, and that it was something about some British behavior, some English behavior that the Juventus fans didn't relate to, and that's what caused chaos. A wall collapsed, and in the chaos that ensued, people were crushed to death. That's the conclusion of that. So, what is running in this context?
So I'm not entirely sure. You pointed that out to me, and I in my head, what I think it generally is, and I'm sure somebody will correct me if I'm wrong, but the idea is that the crowd of people would run towards, in this case, the visiting fans, with the idea of looking like you're going to stampede them. And then I think with that, they wouldn't actually do that, but you would run towards them and stop short. So the idea is to scare them, to intimidate them. Yeah. But as he points out, if you've never seen that before, that can be quite terrifying. A large group of people rushing at you that you don't know that they're going to stop.
Yeah. They look dangerous. Yeah.
And especially remember, they're English, and we've talked about the reputation, the deserved reputation that a lot of English fans had, let's be honest, for hooliganism and things like that. If you've never actually experienced this sort of thing, and now they become the living embodiment of your worst nightmares. Yeah, you're going to panic. And that's partly what happened there. Heysel was there was some panicking and people running into places, and there was some crushing, and then the wall collapsed. And so it was an ugly scene. They played the game afterwards too, which is kind of one of those things. It's Juventus ended up winning, but everyone was, a lot of the reports afterwards were like, yeah, it was weird. Like, nobody seemed to want to be there.
Right.
Which, I mean, considering what we know happened. Yeah wow.
Understandable, yeah.
And so I believe that's what running is. I'm sure if there's something I'm missing about that, but I think that's roughly what they're talking about there.
Sure. So today, all Premier League jerseys have the names on them. Most baseball teams do, although the Yankees, at least this season, notably don't.
Yankees have never put names on their uniforms.
Okay.
Never.
Fan-worn jerseys very often do, but
those are.
Yep, that's where my confusion was. So anyways, so then we see Paul when he's coaching his youth team at the school that he's wearing an Arsenal shirt. The cannon, not the crest, which is interesting that, the cannon only jerseys that we had this past season, that's not the first time Arsenal has probably done that, or at least, I don't know if that was fan wear or an official jersey, but actually, no, I think when they showed the regular season jerseys that Steve, Mark Strong's character, was wearing, I think those were cannon too. Cannon only. But anyways, he's wearing a jersey. It just has the number 7 on it with no name. And so, I know it's not Saka. Saka was not yet born. Who would that have been from 88? Do you know what player that would be?
So, I mean, remember for the longest time, numbers were numbers were 1 to 11 for players on the field. So number 7, like, it wouldn't be like there was a guy who wore number 7 who would occasionally, sit on the bench, and so, number 12 would be on in his place.
That's right.
Now, my suspicion is it represents one of two things. The lot of what he's wearing, or a lot of his history, draws back to the 71 double team. And according to Transfermarkt, which has a list of, Arsenal players who have worn different numbers, number 7, the guy who wore 7 most on that, or wore 7 on that team was, I just had it, where is he? George Armstrong. Which I think is what that kid is supposed to represent. Yeah, it used to be they would have the single cannon, and then eventually morphed. They eventually did a more full crest, which is what they typically wear now. It could also be, this being 89, it could be in representation of David Rocastle actually wore number 7 in that period. Or as did Paul Davis was 89-90, so he was the next year. So, it could be, again, it's a couple of different people. It could be, there's a handful of players. Liam Brady was a well-known Arsenal player who wore 7 in the late 70s.
Right.
So it could be representative of a lot of different players, and that's partly the beauty of it. As we sort of talked about, right? The downside to getting a name on is what happens when they sell him or then he leaves.
Right.
With just the number, it could be anybody.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. And, it's funny. I remember now when we watched United, I think that came up in that movie that, like they didn't have the names on it. And it was whoever was playing that position would wear that number. So that sounds familiar now.
Yeah. Well, at least they would be now they were 1 through 11. And then part of what ends up developing early on is like certain positions tend to be in certain places. So we've talked about an 8 or a 10 or a 6,
right.
or the number 1 or the 9.
Yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So next thing I was wondering is there's the match that we really see Steve for the first time, where Paul and Steve are hanging out, and Steve dances the hoochie coochie or whatever the heck he's doing behind the goal. As I think it was his brother who was taking the penalty shot, or at least some poor player was going to take a penalty shot and completely blasted it wide because of a distraction that Steve offered. What, like, they mentioned the team's names were like Royal Oak and Ongar, I think. Those, I mean, they certainly weren't top division teams. Like, there weren't even like bleachers. There was no stadium there at all. They were just like on the grass. He was able to walk behind the goal. Was that like rec, or was that just like really far down the pyramid? Like, what was that supposed to be?
Well, I mean, those are both. I mean, the idea of the pyramid is that anybody typically could enter. Yeah, that's essentially a recreational league. I mean, they're an organized club, like they bought shirts and everything, but they are. Yeah, I mean, it's I think that's sort of I think that's sort of designed there to highlight their general football obsession, right? Then of course they would just go to some random game. Now, of course, his brother's there, so it's a little less weird. But I think that's generally what's going on there.
Okay. I was amused when we see Paul as a kid going to the matches, and he's wearing what looked like what I've only ever seen in the context of like a prize pig in a state fair or something. Like what I found out as I was looking into this a little bit, they're called Rosettes, I guess. So like little ribbons that they wear, like actually not little, like massive ribbons, like circular with the two little tails coming off that were in the colors of the team. And I guess those, along with the scarf on top of like the overcoat that they would typically be wearing because it was always cold and rainy. Like that, I guess that's how you show your colors for the team. And I guess it even had the crests on it and stuff. Like, when did that stop? Because I don't remember ever seeing that.
I don't know. It's the point of comparison I have in Texas, they call them the mums. They're for homecoming. They get homecoming. The girls will get, and guys will get them too. And now increasingly they get larger and larger, but they're essentially those kind of ribbons, and they trail down with them. That kind of rosette ribbon they have there. And you'll see them sometimes, like parents in the stands at a football game. Like with their, you get it like with your kid's name and number or something on it, so that people know that's your, that you're here supporting your kid.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, again, remember he goes for his first game. What is it? 68. I mean, that's a long time ago. So I have no idea.
Well, even within the movie, they weren't wearing those anymore by the late 80s. So sometime in between. Yeah,
that does strike me as a little more of a you're in the 60s and the 70s. You're sort of transitioning away from that sort of wartime generation into something very different, and I imagine that was part of it, sort of changing the nature of how you dress to be at a sporting event.
Yeah. Next question, and this is a kind of a question that started when I was reading the book, and then you definitely see it in the movie too. But he talks a lot about the yelling in the crowd, just like constantly yelling at your own team, not even just like trying to psych out the opposing team, but just like yelling at every player on the team what they're doing wrong and all that stuff. How it was just like constant. He was describing it, and you see it some in the movie. Is that still a thing? Like, I haven't seen that in like American sports when I've been in the stadium. You did see one top division game at least while you were in England, right?
Yeah. I mean, you can always find those. I mean, there's always the people who, we talk about the nature of fandom. There are some people who sort of use sports as a way to sort of relieve the negative pressures of their life, and they shout at their team because they can't shout at their boss or their kids or things like that. So it becomes kind of the negative outlet for a lot of them.
Yeah.
there's a little bit of that. I mean, there, and there's also like, you want to win, right? You want to win. You want your team to be successful. All of that. And when they're not successful, it just drives you crazy. And sometimes the obvious thing is, well, why did you screw up? You messed up. You're no good. And that's part of the conversation you'll get, right, about certain. We're talking about teams and players, right? It's a lot of times it's about your team. Why didn't you win? Well, because we started that guy. We should have started this other guy. Of course, we always forget there's a whole other team that's playing too, and then is trying to win also. I think that's what that is. You can go to games, you can still hear some of that, but I do think that it is something a little different in just the general atmosphere. But there's plenty of it that's generally trying to be supportive too.
Okay. That's good to know. That's a little heartening. So I think I know the answer to this, but there aren't houses like right up against the front gate at the Emirates, right?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
And it's down the street from where Highbury was, so it's not actually very far at all. Okay. But I think they did a lot more to sort of give themselves a little more space, a plaza, sort of congregating areas for fans, as opposed to a Highbury. Stamford Bridge is like this too. Like it's in the neighborhood,
right?
And then they go look at that house, right? And Paul and Sarah look at that house. Is literally looks out the window, like across the street. He looks out the window and there's the stadium.
Oh, that was a great scene. As someone who, you're on the side of Paul, the angle he's coming at it from, but the conversation with the landlord. Oh, so how often do they play? Oh, it's about maybe once a month. You can barely even hear them. And we're just laughing in the audience because we know he knows how full of crap the guy is. Right, he's just trying to get someone to rent it. That was really funny.
Which, of course, the funny part there is he really would rather have said all the time, and he prefer.
Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah, it doesn't matter to him because he's never going to be in his apartment, in his flat, when the game is going on, anyways.
Right, there is that too. Yeah.
So shifting to the 2005 movie, and I'll give you the little bit of context you might need to answer this, but basically that movie starts off with something similar with a divorce, only instead of his father coming and that's what they bond over is football. Instead, it's his uncle. His uncle takes him to Fenway, and his uncle has season tickets. They go all the time, and then his uncle eventually passes away, and he gets the season tickets. That was something that didn't entirely make sense to me, that a season ticket could be passed down, because that's something you have to buy every year, right? Is it the first right to buy the season ticket at the offered price that is what you pass down? What's the arrangement there?
Yeah. So, I mean, with any sort of thing, remember that there's always going to be greater demand than there is supply. That's what gives it value. And so for older legacy teams, and the Red Sox are a great example because their stadium is so small, for those kind of older legacy teams, and by the way, they'll control the supply even further, because they obviously, you want to sell single game tickets, and so you're only selling a certain number of season tickets. And so what essentially you have is teams have a priority list for season tickets. So essentially, you're on the idea is getting on the list. I mean, I know the Giants have one that apparently people have been on the list for decades. Wow. The Green Bay Packers. I'm sure the Red Sox are part of that too. And you can, in fact, will your season tickets to people. People do that. They stay in the family, and then people hold them. So that part actually that I'm well familiar with. So he presumably has got in, and then just his uncle willed the tickets to him, and that was it.
Okay, that's good to know. That's interesting. Shifting to trivia a little bit for some of the stuff. I like going into that a little, some fun things. You had actually mentioned something to me before I rewatched the latest movie, Fever Pitch. You said something about Drew Barrymore and Jimmy Fallon being out on the field, and that was a real game situation that was happening or something.
No, so as you've talked about, part of the reason they chose the Red Sox is because of their long championship drought. They're filming the movie's released in 2005, but it's filmed in 2004. 2004 was when the Red Sox actually broke that drought and won the World Series. Well, they were filming them. They sort of, apparently, I get the impression is they kind of picked it up as they. Well, I mean, they didn't pick it up. It was pretty obvious what was happening, but as they're doing the filming, it became very likely that they might actually do it. And so actually, when they win the World Series in St. Louis, and the players, of course, pile on the field, that you can see Jimmy Fallon and Drew Barrymore run out there with them. Yeah. It's so weird. It is really weird to think about. It's a weird thing. But yeah, I assume at the end they win the World Series and they're celebrating there, right?
Yeah, basically, yeah. And I read about that a little bit after the fact. So, the two of them flew down to St. Louis to see the fourth game or whatever the pivotal game was. Yeah, because I think they did sweep. Actually, I think they broke a record. They won a certain number of straight games in the postseason that no other team in any American sport has done, I think.
Not in baseball hadn't been done, but
I think they even said the NHL. I think other sports
that is not true. That is okay. If they said that, that's definitely not true. But anyway, not important.
Okay.
But yeah,
so they went down and they basically went out on the field after that was won, and they were able to use it.
Yeah, they're basically celebrating with the team which is so weird to think about. Because they were filming the movie, and it kind of worked out.
So one thing that was funny to me when I was watching, so you see this pivotal match at Anfield in the original movie, and I forget if it was the first goal or the second goal. I think it was the first goal that Arsenal scored. The whole play begins with a back pass from the player to the keeper, which the keeper picks up and distributes forward to begin the attack. And I'm watching, I'm thinking, he can do that? And so apparently that was a rule change that happened not long after, right?
Right. That the back pass rule was instituted after the 1990 World Cup.
So yeah, it was 1992. I'm seeing it went into effect. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Because Italia 90, the 1990 World Cup in Italy, is generally regarded as one of the worst is probably the wrong word, but certainly one of the least exciting. Because the defensive play had so taken over the game that pretty much every game felt like it was 1-0. You scored the goal and the game was over. And the general sense was that it was just a turgid slog through, and so part of what they tried to do in the aftermath is change some of the rules to try and spur some more offense or at least weaken the defense a little bit. And one of the ones they come up with is the back pass, that the keeper can't pick it up. Because of course, when the keeper picks it up with his hands, nobody can do anything until he puts it down. When he's playing with the ball at his feet, though, as we've seen, he is susceptible to being attacked and pressed and tackled. And so that was part of the goal, done partly with the goal of let's move the game along. Now, obviously, as you saw there, not every that doesn't happen every time. Plenty of times the keeper picks up the ball and chucks it forward, and then we just move on. But it is an easy way to time waste.
Yeah, so I'll try and roll through some of these that require a little less discussion, but they're fun to note. So for one thing, the remake was called The Perfect Catch in many markets, including England, outside the United States, to differentiate it from Fever Pitch, the 1997 movie. So that was kind of funny. Nick Hornby had a cameo in the original movie. He was the coach of one of the teams that Nick's youth team beat. Which, by the way, I loved seeing Paul. Oh, I said Nick's team. I meant Paul's team. Whoops. But I loved seeing him as a coach. He was really good. The things that he was trying to have his players do, teaching them how to do an offside trap and stuff.
That's a deliberate Arsenal reference. He's definitely doing. Again, the strong defensive side, the back four. Yeah. You can get another good reference to the Arsenal back four if you ever watch the movie The Full Monty.
Oh, really? Okay, I have not seen that one.
And how the guys on stage, you have to keep even with each other, just like the Arsenal back line. Yeah,
that's funny. So the scenes at the terraces. So again, like for anyone who maybe hasn't read the book or hasn't read it recently, the terraces were the standing only areas that really looked like concrete steps, like you would have leading up to the front of a building or something. And that's what allowed crushes to happen. So they aren't there anymore. And they weren't even at Highbury anymore by the mid 90s when they were shooting this movie. So all the scenes that were shot on the terraces were actually shot at Craven Cottage. That's
Fulham.
Is that Fulham's? I was going to say Fulham is on the tip of my tongue. Just making sure. So it's Fulham's stadium. So that was kind of funny. Presumably they have now replaced those like everyone else, I imagine. But
yes, they're now all cedars, as they're called.
So one thing that I thought was really funny that I'm sure went over almost everybody's head ever, but for the people who it didn't, I'm sure they laughed extra hard. But Sarah asks Paul to quote Lord Byron. And he quotes a famous couplet. The Assyrians came down like the wolf on the fold. Their cohorts were gleaming in purple and gold. But he doesn't say purple and gold. He says black and old gold, which it's wolves on the fold, like the wolf on the fold. And that's the color of wolves, the team. They are black and gold, right?
I believe you mean Wolves United.
Yes, exactly. What was the one where she said United where it didn't belong? That was funny.
It was Wolves United. That was a
yeah.
Wolves
Right. That was the one. Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought you were saying something true. I fell into that in the moment, even though I know better.
And again, it's played a little bit for laughs because and what makes Paul the obsessive is how she says like Wolves United, and you can see him just white knuckling the steering wheel going, it's Wolves.
Yeah.
It's just Wolves. I can't
say something.
I can't let you say the wrong thing.
I relate. It was really funny to me. I'm going to quote a brief excerpt, but this is when he's talking about like, where does this end? Like, how does his life end up if he stays like this? And it was so funny. But I fear that I'm daft enough to pass it over and thus ensure that the child, he's talking about his potential future child, spends hours on some Hampstead couch in the year 2025 explaining to a disbelieving shrink that throughout his or her childhood, I always put Arsenal first. Family, bereavement, work. That was very funny to me as someone reading that passage in 2025 that it worked out that way.
I know. We're also 10 years past 30 years into the future from Back to the Future, so like
yep.
Still no hoverboards. But anyway.
Nope. Gosh darn it. It was funny. Apparently, you see them throughout the movie drinking Holsten Pills. That's the brand of beer that Paul and Steve apparently prefer, which I guess at that time they were sponsors of Spurs.
Probably a shirt sponsor.
So it's kind of funny. Like they're marking that as like a gaffe. Like it was probably a placement deal. That's why they were doing it. But there's like no way that Arsenal fans of that time period would be drinking that beer. I don't know if that's necessarily true. Like if your favorite beer suddenly starts sponsoring a team that you don't like, do you stop drinking them?
Yeah. How is that a question?
I don't
understand the question. What do you mean? It's not a question. What is it? Of course you do.
It was like
there's other beer.
Yesterday, I was in one of the stores inside Yankee Stadium, and I asked if there was a stand where like they're selling any of the visiting team merchandise, and the guy looked at me and he's like, "No." Like he was like actually angry.
No, why would you do that? Listen to yourself.
I know. In fairness to me, I only thought of that after someone told me something about like going to see the Orioles play in Fenway, I think it was. And that I think he said that they did get an Orioles jersey at Fenway. So that's why it seemed like a possibility to me, honestly. But
I don't. No, why? That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. So a couple things now about the 2005 movie. So they talk about an 8-7 victory over the Yankees in Game 4 of the American League Championship Series, the ALCS. That's the only thing in that movie that didn't actually happen that way, or they changed the results of the game to make it more dramatic for the purposes of the movie. But other than that, all the results that they showed were real. The actual score to that game was 4-6, not 7-8. Jimmy Fallon, who I remembered, I wasn't thinking of this as I was watching the movie, but remembered, yeah, he's from Saugerties, which is like right across the bridge from where I live now. It's like really close. He's definitely a Yankees fan. So again, like kind of we were talking about before, Boston made sense as the team that you would use in this story for a bunch of reasons, where even a Yankees fan can go along with it and star in it. He has a green monster replica. So for anyone who isn't familiar with American baseball, that's the green monster is the name given to the massive tall wall in left field out in the outfield where you need to hit it over that to get a home run. It's very, very high up there, and it has a scoreboard that's part of it, and he has a replica of that on his wall. And I was tickled to find out that like the score is the score of an actual game that he has on his wall, and that is Game 3 of the 1999 ALCS victory over the Yankees. A game it sounds like you would probably remember, which was the Red Sox's
I remember that one,
biggest victory at the time. Yeah,
no, I remember that one. I also remember the other 4 games in the series that the Yankees won, but we'll just en route to another World Series.
Well done. So here, this is what I was talking about before. So this is according to IMDb, which, it's user submitted. It could definitely be wrong, but they were saying that when the Sox beat the Yankees in the ALCS, which they were down 3-0, so they had to win 4 straight games to do that, and then sweeping the Cardinals in the World Series marked the first time a team had won 8 consecutive games in a single postseason. It also marked the first time in MLB history, and as of the end of 2019, still the only time, with the other 4 teams accomplishing that feat, all being NHL teams, that a team has won a best-of-7 series after trailing 3-0. That's what I was thinking of, had never been done before.
Yes. Beforehand,
no team facing that deficit had even forced a Game 7. They hadn't won more than 2 in a row. So that's the trivia. I thought that was all interesting.
Yeah, you're paying for my therapy bill after this. Yes, 8 wins in a row had happened in other sports, but probably maybe even in baseball if I look through it. But yes, the comeback as it was the first time that had happened in baseball.
Well, that was the first time that a baseball team, it sounds like, had won 8 consecutive games in the postseason. Yeah. Right. Yep. Yeah, it all checks out. Good. The world is right again. So what would you say is your favorite thing, the best thing to you about Fever Pitch, the book and original movie?
I'll stick to the movie on this, our old best and worst. I'll stick to the movie on this. I liked the way... I guess it'd be an interesting way to say, I liked the way they tried to adapt it and sort of used the gap between championships as a way to sort of demonstrate his growth and sort of bring closure. The championship sort of becomes the culmination of his life of fandom and sort of allows him to move on. Mm-hmm. Even though he's starting to bring other people in, even as other people are being brought in, he is able to sort of move past that. And so he's talking at the end about having, like, he doesn't actually go to every game anymore and all of that. So I thought that was structurally very good in a movie that, let's be honest, wasn't that great. The obvious answer is Anfield 89, of course. That's the best part of the movie. Yeah. But I do think structurally they did a good job in terms of the overall story and sort of how that they use that as that moment where he can sort of... It is a moment that allows Sarah, to come in, but it's also one that allows him to step back a little. They can meet each other in a healthier place, which is pretty good.
It's actually funny you say the movie isn't that good overall. I mean, overall, I really enjoyed it. I think being a Gooner, being an Arsenal fan, I think is a big part of that. I think if that's about any other Premier League team, there's no way I rate it as highly as I do and relate to it as much as I do. But I think all those things, like, it is very much a movie made for us, like, in a way. And like, I loved it. I thought it was really good.
Okay.
But for me, the specific things, so I do have some things for each book and movie that I'll call out as one or two of the best things to me from them. So for the book, it was just learning the history of a team in the sport. Like, that was eye-opening to me. I feel like I learned a lot about the culture, which, like you were saying earlier, it's from a somewhat biased narrator. Like maybe everything isn't exactly as he said it was. Some things that I learned were maybe not entirely accurate, but I feel like the overall gist probably is for a lot of that stuff. And a lot of the specific things around the way that the stadiums are, learning about the Hazel disaster I hadn't heard of before. I think because of, like we were talking about, the extra casualty that came up fairly recently, I was familiar with I keep on wanting to say Woodsboro, which I think is where the Scream franchise takes place, but Hillsboro. That one I had heard of, but yeah, it's that kind of thing. Like I really appreciated that aspect of it. For the movie, there were two scenes, and they both relate to Paul as a coach. Naturally, that's what I'm paying attention to, is how he coaches these kids. As a youth coach myself, that offside trap scene was great to me. I thought that was hilarious. So you see him working with the kids, practicing it. Then you see in the game when he gets them to do it, and they do it right, and it works. And then the referee doesn't call it offside, and that team ends up scoring from an offside position with no whistle blown. And I thought that was great. That was just a perfect encapsulation. And I love what he says after that. He's coaching these kids too well for their age, or something like that. Mm-hmm. I thought that was great. Okay. I also thought it was really good when you get to the climactic moment, the climax of the youth sports part of the movie, where they're in the semifinal, I think it was, for whatever cup they're competing for. And, you know, the kid who has been really close to Paul the whole time gets to take the penalty kick, and he misses it. And I feel like the way that Paul dealt with that situation was really great, and gives a hint that maybe he isn't quite as emotionally stunted as we might otherwise think he was. Because it was a very mature way to talk to the kid about it, where he gives him something else to think about. He distracts him, first of all. And more than anything else, he models the behavior of how you should act about it. Like, look, you know, you had a great season. This is one moment. Don't let it define you, you know, showing that it doesn't bother him, instead of, you know, being the crazy, obsessive, like win at all costs coach from the Mighty Ducks or something, like, you know, throwing a chair at the kid or something. Like, no, you know, you'll get another chance next season, you know, like being the level-headed adult there. I thought that was, that was really good. And actually, maybe as I'm talking about, undercut a little bit of how we're supposed to think about him by that point in the movie. But yeah, I thought that was great. Mm-hmm. The moment I would pick from the 2005 movie, it's I guess I won't go into too much. Well, I guess you don't care about me spoiling you on anything.
I mean, I know how it ends. I do know how it ends.
No, this is something early on. This is where we're butting into my way more broad definition of spoiler than yours.
Oh yeah,
where like I'm talking about a scene toward the beginning, like their first date, what you would call in a romantic comedy the meet cute part of it, like where like they have their first date. There are some hijinks. I thought that was really funny, and it really tells you a lot about each of their characters, and I thought that was very well done, and surprisingly tactfully for a Farrelly Brothers movie. They could have leaned in the direction of gross out humor, which they didn't really do, and I applaud them for that. So, so what would you say is the worst aspect of these to you?
I think you know my answer for the second movie, but to me, the worst part of as much as I appreciated the romantic comedy and the romantic angle as a framing device for the whole movie, I thought the early part of their romance was just it's an obvious contrast, right? You know, mm-hmm. she's rigid and uptight. He's loose and fun. Opposites attract.
George Graham, yeah.
But there's zero build up to that. Like, he just gives her a ride home. She invites him in for tea. It just all it all happens in about 30 seconds.
I disagree a little bit. So I think from his point of view, you know, she's cute, right? He likes her physically, right? And I think from her point of view, she had the conversation with the roommate beforehand where you can tell she's thinking about him, right? And you can tell they had the conversation about buying a new rug, right? Like that whole thing, you know, the roommate could tell that she liked him, right? So it doesn't come completely out of nowhere.
But it's still, not that I'm a connoisseur of romantic comedies, but they're a Rom-Communist in the Ted Lasso vernacular. But I need a little more build up to that, you know?
Yeah.
I think part of the problem is they went straight from they've never met before to the relationship, and that just felt like way too abrupt for me. Like, I mean, if you had started it with them having like gone or meeting for a first date or having already gone on a date or two, but like it's the first time they've ever interacted is when their classrooms are next to each other,
right?
And within a week, they're she's getting new carpet. Like, I don't. That was just a like that. Like that was sort of. I was like, this all feels kind of undercooked to me.
That's true. I see what you're saying. I guess I tend to fill in headcanon for stuff like that sometimes. Like, I kind of imagine, well, maybe it's not a week, or maybe they have been chatting in the faculty lounge a little bit more or something like that. It's not on screen. I see what you're saying.
Yeah, but I mean, like, I was recently watching Pretty Women, the Julia Roberts, Richard Gere, which is a much more outlandish concept, and yet is their relationship is relatively believable and how it begins.
More earned.
Or think of any of Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan's, that. I'm not a connoisseur of the genre, but I know what I'm looking at, is what I'm saying.
Well, I think this is explained in the book, right? Like, Nick knows football a lot better than he knows romance. So for me, I'd say what you've highlighted as one of the best things in the movie is, I think, one of the shortcomings of the book, which is, and I realize it's a memoir, right? But there isn't much of a narrative arc to it, right? The same way that you kind of see on screen, and they even explicitly talk about how he's able to kind of let go that the catharsis of the victory at Anfield, right? You don't really have that as much in the book. The book just kind of ends in a way. Like, there isn't as much of a structure to it. Like, I enjoyed it. I thought it was good. It was hard for me to try and think of something that I didn't like about the book overall, because I really did enjoy it. But I guess if that's something that I would say, maybe, and this is his first book too. I mean, cut the guy some slack. But even when they are true events, you can still frame them in a way that gives them more narrative shape, probably. But that's, trying to find something. That's what I landed on. For the movie, that head of year interview, when like the one guy is just like totally dominating the conversation, at first about Arsenal, and then about the youth soccer team, and then about the hanky panky between him and Sarah. Like, that was obnoxious, and I don't know if that served much of a purpose. Which, again, like, I love this movie. Like, I thought it was very good, and I was trying hard to find something that I didn't like about it, and that was what stuck out to me. And yeah, for the 2005 movie, it's like you said, it's the Red Sox. If it hadn't been the Red Sox, that I would have liked it even more. So, with that, was there anything else that you wanted to talk about? I'm not going to ask you what's up for next week, because this is a film studies episode.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure this episode is running longer than the actual movie itself. No, I don't really have anything else to say. We could wax more poetic on Arsenal stuff, and we've studiously avoided Arsenal news. We're recording this in the middle of the summer, but we don't want to date this to any particular time. So with that, I think I'm actually all fever pitched out.
In our defense, the runtime of this episode is going to be less than the combined runtime of both movies that we discussed. So thanks for joining us at Gooner U Film Studies. If you're watching on YouTube, you can also listen to our show on Apple, Spotify, and some other places. If you're only listening, try watching us on YouTube with a link in the show notes. Your homework for today, in addition to reading or finishing the book, is the much quicker task of watching and liking one of our shorts. We record the show using Zencastr. If you'd like to try it out, you can support Gooner U by signing up using the link in the description, which also has links to everything we talked about and our social pages. Again, my name is Dove, and you can find me on Letterboxd at DoveF. With me, as always, is Keith, and you can find him in a pub watching Arsenal matches and movies.
Occasionally movies now to get those Arsenal boxers.